Buenos días, buenas tardes, buenas noches a todos. Bienvenidos a una entrevista más que especial. Hoy hablaremos con Teslyn Barkman. Teslyn es una periodista y política de las Islas que se desempeña como miembro de la Asamblea Legislativa por la circunscripción electoral de Camp desde 2017. Y antes de ingresar a la política, fue periodista de Penguin News. Thank you, Teslyn, for giving us this interview and your time to talk with us. The first question in relationship to the 40 years of the war, I want to ask you, what about life there after the war?
So life in the Falklands certainly did take a very sharp turn after 1982. So I myself was born after the war. So there was quite a lot of first getting everyday systems back together and kind of working out our own new path with the spotlight that post 1982 shone on us. The designation of the fishing zone, our economic space, really unlocked a lot of wealth for the islands. Falkland Islanders were able to set up businesses and step into spaces that previously hadn't existed. And as a result, the prosperity of the islands grew. We were able to fund our students to go overseas and bring back that skills base to help our small community continue to prosper.
Teslyn, hi. We knew that you are a journalist. Well, I guess you are still a journalist, even though you're not, I suppose you're not working now. What I'd like to know is how much of an impact being a journalist have from you now working in order to help people from the Iceland?
Okay, so that's a very good question. I think certainly with my background in the Falklands, learning about international politics, learning about the environment in particular, two very kind of strong aspects for most Falkland Islanders here. You kind of want to lend your own voice to try to elevate some of these different areas. For me, I mean, certainly taking on those challenges that kind of address everyday communities and trying to find new ways of doing it was something that drove me into politics eventually, because I think particularly kind of watching the demographic change that the Falklands has taken over the past few years, I think there was a bit of a call for some kind of younger, fresher ideas to come through the system to try and help steer the community. We're a very kind of liberal society. We've got some really, really great qualities as well that make the Falkland society really, really special and unique. We want to make sure we maintain that for the long term, whether it be in our environment, whether it be in our the way in which our community can come together and rally behind each other to support each other. I mean, it really is quite a testament, or quite a good example, actually, I think, to the rest of the world on how you can think locally, act globally. And that's kind of the mentality that certainly Falkland Islanders want to keep to uphold.
Leslie, how's the population made up? Are the Argentines there or not?
So we've actually got, I think, over 70 different nationalities at the last census. We've just undertaken a new one, so there might be some new data coming out soon. There are some families from Argentina who live here. Actually, I think one just lives just up the road from me, up on the same street that I live in. And I think what makes our society really, really unique is that while there are plenty of people like myself who are like 6th, 7th generation Falkland Islanders, there's always been this strong sway of immigration coming in. But it kind of adds a richness to our community. And certainly in the last few years, we've really tried to embrace people coming from the Philippines, from Chile, which there's always been a fairly strong percentage of the country that's from one of our nearest neighbors. And I think, it really does credit to our society that we are so welcoming, really.
Teslyn, I have this question about how now the government in the Iceland is working now. The relationship with the government from Argentina, I don't know if you are having kind of a contact now, now that we are having this 40th anniversary for the war.
We've certainly been kind of, occasionally we've been alerted to some of the different moves of the government of Argentina. Particularly, we've seen that they've set up what would certainly, in our view, be a very aggressive list of different moves. And it's incredibly disheartening as a human being when a government of another country decides to try to undermine your humanity or your economy or your right to decide your own future. It can become, I don't know if there's quite the right enough short words to describe it, but certainly it can become quite an overbearing and very disruptive nuisance, which we do continually have to try and look past. Even though we're moving into the 40th year, we decided to look forward at 40 because we know we've got a bright future ahead. And while it seems that these issues and certainly the very negative stance of the government of Argentina continuously seems to drum around in the background, we still manage to prosper and still manage to have an economy which is the envy probably of many in the world, that we've not gone into recession. We invest back into our country in a really powerful way. And we'll just continue to do that regardless. I think whatever happens in terms of international discussions, it needs to happen under the framework that's been agreed. Any responsible nation would continue to uphold international agreements. And so I think for me, if there is going to be any kind of discussion around the Joint Communique 2016 under the framework of the 99 agreement, that's the principles that we need to uphold.
Teslyn, about the future of the island, how do you see this future?
And the future of my country, certainly. I mean, I think for me, I think it depends which kind of aspect you're coming at it from. I mean, culturally, I think, as I was describing before, there's some really kind of unique opportunities that kind of define the uniqueness of the Falklands culture. We've got some really lovely kind of very authentic traditions, and even like our cuisine, our language, it's very particular and very nuanced in particular ways. But for me, I think the focus, certainly the mandate from the people during the last election has been, what are we going to do about the environment, and what does it mean in terms of our place in the future and the sustainability of our country? Because we know we're very natural resource led, but there's quite a high respect for nature in the Falklands, and you'll see that when you talk to anybody, whether it be a farmer out in a very isolated community, or whether it be anyone you bump into on the streets of Stanley. Like, you've got to respect nature. So for me, I think we'll continue to do what we do, and we'll enshrine what we want to protect and continue to do. I think Falkland Islanders generally as a nation are incredibly proud of what we've achieved. Over the past 40 years in particular, there's been probably a really difficult level of, very difficult to describe the kind of level of progress that we've made. I think it's pretty quite confusing to the world to think that only a few decades ago, there were no roads that linked between settlements, really. Horseback was generally a mode of travel to get across camp in particular ways. And people were living quite, by modern standards, even in the 80s, probably like hard lives. But it was a choice and a pride that you take in your country, that you've lived and kind of evolved with the nation which you call home. And I think because of that, we respect the gift that we've been given so much more. And that gift of freedom that we got post 1982 has been incredibly respected. And I think the next generations will continue to build on that. And we just have to make sure the values remain true.
I have a question. It's nothing about
Sure.
politics. I would like to know about the language. Obviously, it's English, but do you have any slang? It's kind of different from the UK or something. Just curious about that.
Oh, certainly. Like, even though I'm speaking to you now, I'm very aware, like, I've got quite a, what do you say, kind of traditional British kind of accent. But certainly when it comes to, you know, being out and about in camp, I think you kind of notice the nuances of our language a bit more. Because there was quite a strong swathe of Uruguayan immigration, like early in the 1800s, when they set up kind of cattle ranch farming in the Falklands. There's quite a few places across the islands that have actually got what would appear to be Spanish names, but they're not pronounced in that way. So a good example is there's a place called Trinquilidad, which, when it's written on the map, it is written as Tranquilidad, but we pronounce it Trinquilidad because, like, that's one of the nuances that we have. But for example, it's a very windy day outside, so we'd say, you know, Pucha Manche, it's blowing a hoolie, like those kind of idioms that have kind of evolved out of maybe partly Australian, partly South American, but just completely reworked into our own kind of phrases. Does that make sense?
It does, obviously. Yeah, I was curious about that because, you know, we are from the south, so I just guess that you have some from Australia or something like that.
Yeah.
What about the food, the weather? What is the main, the most famous place? If someday we travel there, what do you think we should be the best?
I'm sorry, you broke up a little bit there. Please could you repeat?
Yeah, are you hearing me now?
Yeah, I can. It's just that connection can be a little bit spotty sometimes.
Okay. It's okay. I would like to know about the food there, the weather.
There's a brilliant book that was written by someone who was my art teacher when I was at school, actually, which actually kind of captures all of Falklands cuisine. It's called Cooking the Falklands Way. But I suppose the traditional dishes would be roast mutton. I'm trying to think of different things. It depends on what you're doing. So, for instance, like the traditional shearer's breakfast would be something like dough fries, chops, and things like that. But I think Falklands cuisine's kind of also quite interestingly kind of changed even over the last 40 years. So, for instance, people never really used to eat fish, and now that's, you know, squid is continuously on the menu because it's beautiful calamari that is sourced near the Falklands. But no, I suppose kind of very, very rich, very meaty, hearty fare, I suppose, particularly in the 1900s, where there were kind of seasonal scarcities of certain things. People would collect things like penguin eggs or upland goose eggs. Upland goose eggs certainly probably more common now, and use those, and it's kind of ingrained in the culture a bit.
Teslyn, if you have leave a message of peace to the citizens of both nations who have fought in the 1982 war, what do you say about that?
I'd say it's one of those things. What would you say to convince them that your people, your future, your humanity should be respected? And it's a very different, but certainly growing up as a Falkland Islander, you think about it a lot because you're forced to, and it's rather sad in a way that you have to. But I suppose all I would do is just remember, don't let politics ruin what is the truth of the matter, and please try and understand that there's just a community here that want to live freely, have decided how they wish to do that, and to respect it. And I don't think veterans of the Argentine war, on the Argentine side of the 1982 war, or on the UK side, ever would wish for such a tragic event to ever happen again, or even for that one to have had. And that's exactly why people's wishes and humanity should be respected.
Okay, Teslyn, thank you very much for your time, for your passion about tell the history. Of course, was a great interview with you and Jasmine, and thank you a lot.
Well, thank you very much for your time and for reaching out to us here in the Falklands.